At this time, we'll call on Kelly Jameson, who will have a presentation for our IPRA and cost to our district. Ms. Jameson.
Hi, Ms. Jameson. Welcome.
Hello, good evening, President Jaramillo, Vice President Tenorio, members of the board, and Superintendent Ramos. I'm Kelly Jameson with an overview of the impact public records requests have had to the bottom line here at Las Cruces Public Schools. Before I dive into the presentation for those present and also for the sake of everyone watching on live stream, let me recap that the New Mexico Inspection of Public Records Act requires the district to provide public documents to anyone who requests them. We are required to make copies, redact. Those redactions, which are required by law, are sometimes the reason that these requests are overly broad and burdensome or provide a strain to the district here. Tonight I want to show you the frequency of IPRA requests over a 2-year period, how those requests impact resources here in the district or the total cost to the district to allocate those resources, and finally what the law says about recovering those costs. The Communications Department has been tracking IPRA requests since March of 2021. Since that time, we saw 54 requests over the year 2021, and then that number almost doubled to 90 in 2022. In the last meeting, you might remember Ms. Gallegos noted that there seems to be a nationwide trend in the spike or in the interest in public records, and it was that spike and the strain on the Communications Department that created the position for a dedicated records custodian. You met him last time, Zach Fosio. He was hired last summer. The majority of these requests impact 5 different departments, mainly communications, HR, finance, information operations, and also equity, innovation, and social justice. Among those departments, we have approximately 12 records custodians who are responsible for identifying, copying, redacting, scanning documents that they decide are responsive. If one request covers each of those 5 departments, collectively the cost to the district hourly is about $552.81. Now that's not including the 6,400 estimated pieces of paper that we generated over the last 2 years, or the cost to redact, or the cost of a storage device. And there were a few requests over that 2-year time period where we did provide external hard drives and or flash drives. There was also in 2021 some complicated, more complex IPRA requests that required the advice of our legal counsel, and those totaled approximately $551,000. Drilling down, if we track the hours...
50, I just want to say, at 51,000, right?
$51,566.45. Thank you.
Half a million's a little bit much. That might be your BMW out there.
And it's right in front of me.
Just kidding with you. Sorry, Ms. Gallegos.
Ms. Gallegos doesn't park in the back.
No. I just wanted to clarify the amount.
I appreciate that, President Jaramillo. Now, if we drill down and we tracked the hours of each of those requests over the last 2 years, there were 146 requests, and more have come in since I've tallied those. We would have spent about $50,000. It's roughly $48,367.88. If you combine that with the cost to hire somebody and our legal fees, the district has absorbed approximately $153,686.33 to process those requests for public information. And as Madam Court pointed out in the last meeting, these are operational costs that really would have impacted costs to the classroom. So what's allowable by law? I think I skipped this. Under the New Mexico Inspection of Public Records Act, Section 14-2-9, records custodians may charge reasonable fees for copying public records, and they defined those copies as $1 per printed page for an 11 by 17 piece of paper. Our department did some research in school districts across New Mexico. Some districts are charging up to $2 for pages in excess of that size. We are allowed by law to charge for the actual cost of downloading copies of public records to a computer disk or storage device, including the actual cost of that device. We are also allowed by law to charge the actual cost of transmitting copies of public records by mail, email, or facsimile. Important to note because 99% of our requests have been satisfied via email. I included this excerpt from the statute for your convenience. The New Mexico Inspection of Public Records Act says, unless otherwise allowed by law, Any fee charged by a public body may reflect only the actual cost of copying. This may include the actual costs to the public body for making and transmitting copies, including any personnel time involved. And with that, I stand for questions.
Vice President.
I have one question. The graph you showed looked like a spike over the monthly. Does that coincide with something? Like, I'm thinking like news cycles. I'm just curious.
President Jaramillo, Vice President Tenorio, very astute. They do coincide with national news stories. Personally, I've noticed a trend in the beginning of the school year. We seem to see a spike in the request for public records. There was a large interest in the calendar last year, and so we saw some similar requests for information from the public. Also important to note in our research, we found that the city of Rio Rancho publicizes their requests for public records. And they do that for a couple of reasons. One, to be transparent to their stakeholders, and two, to possibly reduce the number of repeat requests. So if you were looking for salaries across the city of Rio Rancho, somebody might have already requested that, and that's posted on their website for you. And it reduces the volume or the strain on resources to their staff.
What are the most time-consuming or costly IPRAs that you get?
President Jaramillo, Vice President Tenorio, easily email. We get voluminous requests for emails among staff, among board members sometimes, and those require us to read each individual email and possibly redact them for personal protected identifiers or matters of opinion or other sensitive information that could be allowed, redactable by law.
Well, I just want to send my appreciation to you and Mr. Zach Fosse, is that his name?
Facio?
And all of the people involved, because I know you all are involved in some way in having to be part of the, responding to the IPRA, and that it is important and that it is by law. So I appreciate your work.
Thank you.
That's fine. Secretary, Madam Court.
Thank you. Thank you, President Jaramillo, and thank you, Ms. Jameson, for your information. I think in the previous slide you said we could be charging for all of these things. Are we currently charging?
President Jaramillo, Secretary Court, we are not charging for records requests. Part of that stemmed from the pandemic and working remotely, and simply it was difficult to do that. With bringing on a records custodian, Mr. Facio has created a mechanism to charge with the finance department, so that has been established. And if I could jump the agenda with the possible passage of policy KDB, we could write regulation that clearly defines the expectation of the requester and what possible charges we could impose for certain records.
One more question. Would we need to include it in policy if we decided to make public record of who has already requested that information? Is that something that needs to come through policy, or something that can just be done through the superintendent or through your office?
President Jaramillo, Secretary Court, I respectfully say I'm not sure.
Okay.
I would defer to Ms. Gallegos for legal advice on whether or not it should be included in policy or whether we could include that in regulation.
And before you answer that, Ms. Gallegos, Ms. Jameson, and I want to clarify, and when you mentioned that, and I think you said it in your question, but I think I want to be clear that it's not that we would publicize the person that is requesting it, right? We would be publicizing the material of what's on there.
Yes, right? Isn't that what you stated? Or was it at the actual?
We could President Jaramillo, Secretary Court, we could publicize or create a fee structure so that it was clear to the requester what would be expected of them for certain records requests if they were overly broad and burdensome, if they required the use of a storage device, or if the request itself was so large that it couldn't be sent via email. Correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Gallegos, but I believe that your name on a records request is also public record, which is why the city of Rio Rancho publicizes theirs. So once you make a records request, your name is public record.
Okay, and thank you, President Jaramillo, for asking for that clarification. Thank you, and
I like the
thank you
idea.
for all the work that you do, and to Mr. Facio, who is not here. Thank you all.
Watching.
Ms. Gallegos.
He's watching.
So President Jaramillo and Madam Court and Ms. Jameson, yes, what Ms. Jameson said is correct. Definitely the requester and the request itself is a public record. There would be nothing that would prohibit the district from publishing that as a way of documenting what they're releasing. And what my understanding is then basically once the response to that would isolate what is public record responsive to the request. So it would be almost like an index. It'd be like looking up, letters to the Attorney General or anything like that, an index where other interested persons could then take a look at it and access it without the district or the secondary requester incurring additional cost.
Oh, that's a great idea.
And I think the original question, I apologize, was whether or not it needed to be in policy. I think
Yes.
it could be in policy or an administrative regulation, either way.
Okay.
And I'm not aware of anything in the current draft that's before you for policy that would somehow limit administration from including that as part of their regulation or their process.
Thank you.
President Jaramillo?
Yes, Board Member Wofford.
So what I may be hearing is that what Rio Rancho does could be a good idea for us, that having people have access to whatever the requests are, and they would be right there for them. I really believe in these sunshine laws. I think they have been an important part of our democracy. I know they were weaponized with county clerks over the last election. And so I saw you said personnel time could be charged.
President Jaramillo, Member Wofford, I would have to defer again to Ms. Gallegos for interpretation of that. I think it sounds overly broad.
Yeah, the last slide was.
And we could interpret that however we wished, with certain reasonability. I think the key, my clicker isn't working.
Yeah.
I think the key phrase in the statute is reasonable costs to the requester. And again, to your point, Mr. Wofford, sunshine laws exist for a reason. This district has worked tirelessly to be transparent and to provide records in a timely manner, which, if you know IPRA, it's within 3 days or 15 days for those requests that need additional time. That phrase in the statute is not meant to prohibit records requests. It's really meant to preserve resources on behalf of the district and possibly reduce the number of frequent requests or overly broad and burdensome requests.
Okay, thank you.
And I will just lastly say, I like the idea in being in policy, just because administration things can change, and if it's in policy, then it takes the board and therefore the community, right? The community to change that, who's sitting in these chairs, to be able to change that, and I think that gives it a little bit more teeth, as you went there, and so. I may like to see something in policy. I think that's something that's going to be a good conversation here in a little bit too.
In
So
a few minutes.
yeah, in a few minutes, yes, in our second reading here. So, board members, any final questions or comments for Ms. Jameson?
I appreciated the information about Rio Rancho and their practice.
Yeah, do your
Thank you.
research.
I'm
Yeah,
going to go to that
absolutely. So,
website.
all right.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Ms.
Thank
Jameson.